Romans 12, verses 9 to 13. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality.
Welcome to the Neighborhood Church Revive podcast. We're so glad that you're joining us today as we unpack big ideas about God's Word together. My name is Shawn Thomas. I'm an associate campus pastor here at Neighborhood Church, and we believe that God's Word is relevant and helpful even for today, which is why we take the time to unpack what it says, talk about it on Sundays here in the podcast, and just, really consider how to live our lives in light of what Christ has done for us. So today we have Pastor Justin McElderry.
And only me. So it's good to be here, Shawn.
That's right. He's
it might be better if you just did a monologue, but I've seen you do it before. It would be excellent, but I'm glad to be with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you here, Justin. Justin and I tag team the Los Al branch. Justin's the head pastor there. I do music stuff, and it's really fun because we have very similar personalities, and so it's kind of like, we can just come in and be quiet and not talk really fast or get all crazy. And so that's super. We can talk about sports. It's wonderful.
How are the Lakers?
Let's move on. Never mind. Actually, as of today, it is October 31st, Halloween, or Reformation Sunday, or Reformation Day, whatever it is. Anyway, the Lakers did win one game.
Oh, they did? Okay.
That's finally. Okay. I think they're 1-5 right now. So.
Well, I'm still envious because you have a team. Mine moved to Oklahoma City. So.
That's true. There are no more Seattle Supersonics.
I guess I shouldn't talk any basketball trash.
That's right. Well, today is not going to be a Supersonics deep dive, although someday, for those of you who are itching for that.
I can talk about Gary Payton all day long.
The glove. See, this is what happens when you get Justin and I together. But we are talking about the last, so in the Rooted, we're in the Planted series, and that's going to be continuing on a little bit here, especially with Cypress Church. But our Rooted series that we've been going to as a supplement, that actually finished this past week with the question of why is church important? And so Justin, you guys heard him speaking that verse from Romans 12. So he really just asked kind of repurpose that question a little bit as how does church help you to become the person that you ought to be or that you want to be? And so we really want to consider, like, based on that passage in Romans, but also based on just kind of contemporary life here today, what does it mean to go to church? Why is it so important? You have, especially in this day and age, post-pandemic, and even before, people were, kind of church attendance was not a high value. But, you always hear those people like, don't forsake the assembling, don't da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you have this tension, but it's like, what's the purpose of that tension? It's like any law or any, kind of prohibition in Scripture. Is it more about don't do this, or is it more about do this and be a more fulfilled, be a more well-composed person? Yeah.
Well, I think the way you framed it is helpful. That passage that I read, it doesn't necessarily speak about church. It just speaks about this amazing kind of person. And you're like, that just doesn't happen naturally, And so Paul's writing to a church, and he's getting to, it's been a very theological letter up through chapter 11. Then 12 is kind of when it turns practical, right?
Yeah.
And so then he talks about, well, we surrender ourselves as a living sacrifice at the beginning of chapter 12. Then he talks about our spiritual gifts, how we pour those out. And then he talks about the kind of person we are. And all of these, I think, are in the context of community. Like, even though it's this appeal for us to present ourselves as living sacrifices, that's still a decision each one of us needs to make, but it has a social consequence of being a community that's committed to that. And then you can't use your gifts by yourself, right?
Yeah.
That the point is community. Yeah. And so I think with this, the passage that I read and the passage that I preached on is like, man, there's this amazing picture of what a loving person is.
Yeah.
And you need a community to help you do that. So some of it's so that you can pour out and love, and others are parts so you can be reshaped. The next section that I didn't read is how you learn humility and different things like that. And Yeah, and so I think it's not intended to be a law. It's intended to be like an invitation to life, but it's also in that, like when I hear that, it always sounds so good. But it's not necessarily an invitation to comfort. Like I think we have so many options church-wise that it's easy to, when we get uncomfortable, to find the next place that we think fits us better. When it might be that we need that rough edge.
Yeah.
Sanded off. And so we need to be in that place of discomfort so we can be shaped to look a little more like Jesus. So I don't know, I'm monologuing now, but yeah.
No, well, and it raises a bunch of questions in my mind, especially I always talk about, like our brand of Christianity here, we're in Southern California, America, super affluent, Orange County, there's definitely the feeling of church. This is made for me. What I'm going to sample and go to a church that meets this need. And maybe it's practical for you guys listening at home. I mean, it's not a bad thing to be like, how's the youth group? I want my kids to be plugged into a healthy place. Yeah. That's really wise, to seek that out. But, sometimes it can be like, oh, what's the singles ministry like? Well, that's important, but like, what about the service ministry? Right. I don't know, like how should we go about approaching when we're looking for a community, maybe if we don't have a church community?
Yeah. I think one of the beautiful things I heard in our life group last night, it was our last meeting at least with the Rooted curriculum, was that one family mentioned that they're at our church because it's small, at our campus in particular. Yeah. And they could go places where they could come in and come out and consume content. Yeah. But this was a place where they could be known, and it was a place where they have started serving in ways that they wouldn't have signed up for before. But because we tap everyone to go to work, then there was the husband in particular found a place. He would have never been doing this at a large church, but he's serving our kids and loving that and the connection that has led to with families. And that's, by the way, not to say that you can't do that at a big church. Yeah. But that engagement piece is critical. And I think one of the downsides there's lots of downsides of COVID, but one of them is with church online, it's a great tool if you need it, or it's a great tool to kind of get a periscope or something, if I don't know if that's the right terminology, of what a service is like, but it's no substitute for engaging in relationships and being present somewhere. Yeah. And so whatever we're doing in church, I think we need to make sure it's not a transfer of knowledge, that church is intended to be a much richer place than that, where we're loved, where we learn to love, where we are shaped, so
I love that.
I was just going to say, and in my second monologue there, I forgot what the question was, but that's what I would look for in a church where can I, where's a place where I can make a difference, or at least figure out who I am, where people will pour into me and I have opportunity and time to pour into others. That would be, I think, the critical piece.
Yeah, I've heard some people talk about like, when I look at a church, I really value something that's multi-generational, even, some people multicultural, they want that experience, but the multi-generational because I know for me, I don't have any grandparents left, and that's been that way for a long time. Yeah. And it's neat. So I serve at a few different churches, and just maybe there's something to that, but for whatever reason, the churches I've been serving at for the last 6-7 years have been elderly churches largely. And it's kind of cool because it's like, wow, for the last not 20 years, but like 10 to 15 years, I've not had grandparents, but I kind of have had grandparents, and it's like, it's pretty cool, to kind of have that.
No, that's great. We have our life group has, I think we had 5 kids. Usually it's 4, but a grandchild came with one of our members. And so my son is a teenager, and so he kind of hangs out with them and gets them wound up, but it's usually outside. But they were just playing so nicely, so quietly until he showed up. And then one of them, while we're like in the middle of a Bible study, shouts into the backyard to the rest of the kids, Kale's here, and their parents are trying to get him to be quiet while we're having an adult discussion. Yeah. He's just full-throated, Kale, but we all loved it. Like it wasn't just the multiple generations. And as I get older, like the delight of having children around is a real thing, and so I think the intergenerational piece is beautiful, and I think and honestly, it's critical from just some stuff I've been reading recently of that, having a certain number of adults who care, who as a teenager, if you know 3 or 4 adults, I can't remember what the exact number is, you're in the church that care about you, know your name, some kind of relationship, your likelihood of sticking with the faith is exponentially increased.
Oh, interesting.
It's not the number of peers you have, it's the number of old people looking out for you and praying for you. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, not to parlay totally into left field here, but I feel like, for often, there's talk even these days about families, how are we raising kids, father figures. I mean, that's sadly these days, there's a lot of kids who don't have fathers at all or father figures or whatever it is, and that's something that young people crave immensely. And that I think that's data that would back that up. It's like, hey, this is, even if it's whatever the extent is, but just older folks who know your name, who, like there's an expectation of, can't be yelling all the time. I have to be polite, but that kind of instills those early habits in us. Yeah. That's really cool.
Well, and I think too, even as a parent, and our kids are walking with the Lord as far as we know, and they're teenagers, so I'm sure there's plenty we don't know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have been so incredibly grateful for the youth leaders in their lives.
Yeah.
Because that's someone, and it falls into that same philosophy of, hey, they may not listen to me when they get that age, at least not all the time.
Yeah.
But if they find out Miss Jen is saying the same thing I'm saying, then even if they listen to her, it's still a win for me. Like even if they blow me off and then they'll listen to her advice, which is the same, maybe just said a little differently. Yeah. Hey, that's okay.
That's huge,
and that's an important piece of it as well. So
that's good, man. When I think, and you also mentioned something about kind of the formative or the refining process. I think it's kind of tough, because in our day and age, again, church seems to get a bad rap, or it's very closed-minded or very insular, and it's interesting because we do need that iron sharpening iron, that space where we can do life with people. And I say that like people, I feel like, get out of the rhythm. You were talking, Justin, earlier about COVID, and I feel like even before the shutdowns or the lockdowns, there was just kind of a bit of a departure, especially with younger generations of like, like, I don't want to do church. And even if it's more of an altruistic, like, my faith is about a relationship. I don't need to do church. I'm about Jesus. And that's good. I'm glad you want to be about Jesus. But I think some people take that to the extreme of like, I don't even need to go to church. Right. But we forget about Jesus himself had not only a small group of 12, but he was leading, sounds like, hundreds of people in his day, and it's like we can't miss that opportunity for community, for refinement, for shaping us in the hard times and the good times and whatever.
Yeah. I mean, he there is that relationship, but he also said, I'll build my church. Right. And so that's what one of the resources he's given us, and we all learn and are socialized everything we do, and certainly the spiritual life as well. And it's pretty dangerous to be on your own completely. So, and I think there's even something that's learned in, probably something in that is a lack of submission. And that's one of the things sometimes that we just need to learn. Like that's it's a hard thing to learn, but that's one of the things I would teach my interns is sometimes you just got to do stuff
Yeah.
Because you're told to do it. And we all have to do that. And we have to learn to do that sometimes with God. And so one of those ways we learn that is by listening to our parents or listening to our bosses.
Yeah.
And just like, okay, I don't want to do it, but I'll do it. And sometimes Jesus does that for us as well. And so, and it's, I think too, we're just embodied real people. And so we're not just, it's not just content transfer. Like I could, well, maybe I couldn't because I don't read or watch that widely, but I could probably pretty easily find you a dozen preachers who are better than me. Actually, it could be a lot more than that. But point being, it wouldn't take much searching, but I could, pull a half dozen off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But that's not the point. The point is you're with people who know you and love you, and when you mess up, they don't cast you off, but they help you grow through it. And that's tough when there's a church on every corner. So that's very easy to move on to the next thing. But
well, that's interesting that you mentioned church on every corner. It's people talk about the Bible Belt. In the South, there's churches on every corner. Even here, I think somebody said, what I've heard in Midway City, somewhere in Orange County, it's one of the most churched cities in Orange County in the United States.
Oh, interesting.
But just by chance that it's a very small city and just randomly it has, So
it's got like two, but it's only
So you're kind of
only like
numbers.
2 square blocks.
Yeah. But it's just this weird, And so I mean, I don't know, what do we do with that as Christians, and there could be a little bit of analysis paralysis of where do I go? There's so many churches. I'll just, stay home and read my Bible. But and I know we talked about, when you're choosing a church, what should you look for? But I don't know. Have you had?
When we came here,
I'm curious about your experience. When
we came
Justin
here,
was looking for
church.
It
was prior to the flood, but it was 1997 when we first started looking for. We moved here, so I went to Talbot.
Pre-millennium.
Before the millennials were born, or maybe around when they were. Anyways, we were looking for a church, and we tried a bunch of them in the area when I first moved to the area for seminary. We came here. The first day we showed up was when Brad Brinson, the pastor at the time, said he was leaving. So we're like, we aren't coming here.
That was your first day.
Yeah, that was the first day. I always wondered, was it me? Was it, I don't
I'm sorry.
My bad, everybody. But no, he went to plant churches, great guy, and went on to fabulous ministry. But we were like, okay, well, we'll keep looking. And then we came back, I don't know if it was a few weeks or a couple months later, but we liked it. And one of the things we noticed was, wow, this church, their senior pastor is gone now, and I can't tell the difference. That this place seems to be functioning. There seems to be a life here that is functioning without the lead pastor. Now, we had come from a church with a big name senior pastor, which was, and so my assumption, and it's probably false now, I'm learning the hardiness. I'm trying to find a smarter word than hardiness, but the hardiness of the church is more than I thought at that time. But I kind of always thought if the lead left, things fell apart. I've learned it doesn't. But at the time, it at least piqued the interest for us. Like, well, this place seems like the church is the church, and so let's see if we can hop in here. And so we volunteered. We were part of the church 3 years before I came on staff. So, but that was it for us. It was like, okay, this is a place that, as we were with newlyweds, my wife's super talented. I'm not. So we could have maybe gone to a larger church and she could have done something, but there wouldn't have been anything. It would have been harder for me, I think, to find my place to develop my gifts and what God had called me to. But point being, it was a place where we thought we could make a difference. And I think that's where it would be, is if you're looking for a church, like obviously you want a place that teaches the Bible. And that's one of the good things about being online is you can check that out before you go. Like, do they teach the Bible? And then once you go there, look, if you have any friends, go with friends and start with relationship, because relationships are the most critical piece. And then from that, check out, hey, how can you get involved? Because that's, Jesus wants us to love him with heart, soul, mind, and strength, which means we do stuff too. And so the church gives us a venue to use those gifts. It's not just us and Jesus, and it was never intended to be so.
I feel like in this day and age, like I frequently will go to churches and just to check them out. I'll find them their website or find them on Facebook, beforehand, Their doctrinal statement is typically really easy to find, so it's nice to be like, okay, what do they preach? What do they believe? And that's super helpful, and that's something to definitely have discernment about. Then looking at their pictures, like how do they portray themselves, or what are they trying to reveal? I remember when I went to college, I went to Biola, Christian college, and in some of our classes, we actually had to go to churches, because when you go to college, very different time, because it's like some folks move away. I wasn't very far away from my home, but I definitely was out of the area, so I wasn't going to go to my same church that I grew up at. So one of the classes actually had us go to different churches that were quite different. I went to a gospel church, and that was wonderful, like super cool. Definitely different, than my typical, and then, going to a Greek Orthodox, service, and like, wow, this is very different, but like still very, reverent, and it was just interesting, to kind of like find those experiences and kind of see how people do church, and then to find where it resonated with me, and that was, Yeah,
that's cool.
Justin, you have children, and I'm curious, one of your kids in college, right?
Yeah.
Have you talked to them about, what does it mean for them to find a church, or even as a parent, like when you're kind of like, where are you going now? Where's this at? Like
some of it was that, of like, okay, where are you trying out? And honestly, it's at the Christian college. We were at a pretty conservative one where they kept your attendance going to church, but a lot of kids drop out of church, in college, if parents aren't there to make them go.
One of the first things that gets dropped.
And when you get chapel 3 times a week, you kind of get it.
Oh, totally. You feel like that's
and honestly,
enough.
If it's just the act of going and singing and listening to preaching, then there is really no difference.
Yeah.
But if it's being known, and if it's contributing, serving, that's where it comes in. And but anyways, with my daughter, for her, it was okay. We would ask. We try not to be overbearing, but we'd say, "Where are you checking out?" And like, "Oh, my friends didn't come with me, so I didn't go today." Okay, but she tried out a few places, but then she got a job at a church. So she's she's an assistant to the children's director at a church in Huntington Beach, and so which has been great. She really loves that, and that's always good to hear.
Yeah,
she's having a good experience working at a church. So
that's so good, man.
It's tough though, and that's when you figure out they got to make it their own. So
that really.
But and I think too, just a thought that popped in there for a second was some of how we do church. We need to almost overcome in terms of if you just go to sing and listen to a sermon, you can do that online. Yeah. And so it's good to meet the people around you in the pews, encourage someone, go out to lunch with someone, to have those conversations that go deeper. So it's, some of how we do it these days is I can see where if you were cynical, or I don't even that's even an overstatement, but it can just be an info transfer. Yeah. If you just are getting in, getting out, but
something to check off the list.
Right.
I did my Christian duty.
Right. Yeah. And so, and even for us as pastoral staff is to like, okay, how do we foster community? I mean, I know donuts are bad for your body, but they're good for our soul. Like they
good for community.
I mean, we do have people hanging out. Like there's people hanging out when I leave, like on Sunday morning, because they're just they started talking over donuts and. Yeah. So once the weather gets worse and I won't burn my scalp off, maybe I'll stay a little longer. But as it is, maybe I need a church hat. Maybe that's what I need.
Broad straw hat.
So I can make it on the lawn after church without burning my head. So
that's good, man. Well, that's I think something for our folks listening, and I know a lot of you guys who are listening at home. You do serve here at Neighborhood Church. Maybe if you're listening, I know we have people listening overseas. Maybe you serve at your church. We encourage you guys even start, at something like a coffee ministry or donut ministry or a greeter or an usher. That's so helpful, not only for, especially if it's a bigger church, just the functioning of a church. I mean, just logistically speaking, it's like, well, we do want to make this someplace that's pleasing and that's not a nightmare for people to come to, like, where do I park? So it's like some stuff like that, it needs help. But then out of that's a community in and of itself. So something that the worship arts team did this past weekend is we had an appreciation dinner for our volunteers. The people who, you guys listening to the podcast, you probably watch our live broadcasts of Sunday mornings. The reason you're able to see that is our volunteers. These are some high school students, parents, some grandparents, like people of all
awesome.
Spectrum, who are volunteering their time. And it was great to sit down and just kind of meet offline in terms of like, hey, we don't have to broadcast, so we're just eating food and enjoying each other's company. And it ended up being a very sweet time of like, just a brief kind of scripture reflection and then just having fun. And it was like, wow, this is so life-giving, And so again, just encourage you guys listening at home, try and get into those, those, especially if you're just learning a church, like Justin was talking about, just visiting a church. Where can I serve? But what's the climate? What's the community like? Is it very supportive? Is there does this lead into deeper community? And then kind of go from there.
And I think too, there's even ways to serve that aren't structural, for lack of a better term. Like you don't need to be a greeter to greet people. Like we had a guy who was our business administrator for years, and you'd need you don't have enough fingers and toes for people. If you asked how they got to the church, he wasn't necessarily the one that invited him, but he constantly found new people on Sunday and greeted them even outside of the formalized greeting time where it was expected. He just would. He was just a good conversationalist. He'd strike up a conversation, maybe go out to lunch with them, or just greet them over the course of 2 or 3 weeks where they feel like they're welcomed. Because it only takes one or two people to make a church feel welcoming or not, right? And so, and even if you're in a place where, man, I really like the teaching, but this place isn't very friendly, maybe that's why God's calling you there, to be that friendly person. That maybe that extrovert or that personality that can help people connect, but to really, as much as you can, you don't have to have a formal role to be using gifts and to be blessing people, so...
Well, Justin and I, to kind of wrap up the conversation, as avowed introverts, we affirm those folks because there's nothing worse, not to talk about church faux pas, but the old, if this is your first Sunday, stand up and greet someone or stand up and shake someone's hand. I mean, that's if you do that, that's fine. But I know there's kind of a larger church movement that's going away from that, but that's awesome. Like if you're Mr. Extrovert and it's like, hey, like I want to greet people after church. I want to make people engaged and included. That's
we don't even do greeting at our campus because my thought is, if you get out of a congregation of 50 without anyone knowing your name and shaking your hand, then that's on us.
Yeah. That's a good call.
New people should not fall through the cracks at our campus because we all see you.
Yeah, we got plenty of room.
Someone needs to go give them a handshake and a hello, so anyways, it's...
Well, Justin, any closing thoughts before we end our podcast?
No, I think just... we ended our, like I said earlier, our life group last night, and it was just a sweet time of praying for each other. And as an introvert, every life group is draining for me heading into it, and I feel wonderful going out of it. That was beautiful. And I think, that might be the case for others as well, of the thought of if you're not unplugged at church, whether it's like you just need to come back to neighborhood church or whether you're listening from somewhere else, and that it's worth that effort, that there's things that happen there of a grandmother praying for her grandchildren who's going through a really difficult time, blessing people who, through the course of our group have shown particular courage and vulnerability. Like that stuff just... it doesn't happen, at least in my experience, and I'm a church guy, so maybe it does happen elsewhere, but it's stuff that can happen regularly in church, for me, has never happened anywhere else, like that, of being able to share your heart, get support, things like that. Not that the church doesn't disappoint from time to time, certainly it does, but the potential for being a resource to help us become more like Jesus. It's what he made. It's as part of the plan.
Yeah.
He didn't make it for just you and Jesus. He made it for us and him together. So find a church, get plugged in. It may stink for a while. It may be hard for a while, but the reward of it will be beautiful. So
that's awesome, man. Well, thank you, Justin. Appreciate your words of wisdom and holding down the fort here in everyone else's absence. And if you guys listening at home, we'd love having you guys here. If you want more sports talk, you can, Justin and I will rap again in the future. But really appreciate you guys listening to us today. As always, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and you can hear our podcast there. You can look up Neighborhood Church of Cypress or Neighborhood Church of Los Alamitos. We're also at those handles on Instagram, Facebook. You can listen to this content or other content, and we would love to hear from you guys. As always, it's great when we can have the conversation continue with our listeners or with our church members. So definitely email us at connect@neighborhoodchurch.com. That's CONNECT@neighborhoodchurch.com. And definitely check out our website, neighborhoodchurch.com/revive. That's where we curate all the content, all the links and videos. We didn't really talk about a ton of content today. Maybe Justin will give me some fun books that I can put in the list that you guys can see about church. But otherwise, happy Reformation Day, October 31st. Good old Luther keeping us real.
Go celebrate and nail some things to your bedroom door or something tonight. Don't do that.
Yeah. Not to anyone else's door. Your own door, that's fine.
Yeah.
Anyone else's
if your
door.
parents say it's okay.
That's right. All right, everybody. We hope to see you next time. Until then, we pray that God would revive your soul.